Imagine, uh, imagine you're sitting at a neighborhood dinner party.
Oh, yeah. The classic setting.
Right. The wine is flowing. The conversation is pretty light. People are, laughing about property taxes or the weather. And
Starting
suddenly,
to get serious.
exactly, the person sitting next to you who is someone you genuinely like, someone who is objectively intelligent, successful, maybe a lawyer or an engineer, they just lean in.
Uh-huh.
They lower their voice and say, the government is actively hiding data that proves routine childhood vaccines are poisoning an entire generation.
Wow. Yeah, that's a heavy pivot for a dinner party.
Right. And your heart rate immediately spikes. You get that flush of heat in your face. And you have to decide. Do you argue the science? Do you just nod politely and stare at your plate?
Which is what most people do, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, or do you actually lean in and try to understand how this highly educated person sitting across from you arrived at a worldview that feels, well, just fundamentally alien to yours?
That specific moment of cognitive dissonance at the dinner table it's really becoming a defining feature of our modern social fabric.
It totally is.
We're increasingly finding ourselves entirely unequipped to navigate these collisions of reality, largely because, we treat them as arguments to be won rather than architectures of belief to be understood.
That's a great way to put it. And we are so glad you're here with us for this new deep dive, because our mission today is to dissect that exact dinner party dynamic.
Yeah, and we've got a really fascinating stack of sources to help us do that.
We really do. The foundational document we're looking at is this incredibly detailed, highly analytical essay written by someone who actually documented a real-life conversation with their neighbor.
Right. It was a casual evening of drinks that just escalated into a massive, multi-hour download of controversial public health opinions.
But the author didn't just walk away and forget about it. They went home and compiled a massive dossier to cross-reference literally every claim their neighbor made.
It's an incredible resource. We're talking primary documents, fact checks, internal government agency data from the CDC, the NIH, the ADA.
And a ton of news clippings spanning all the way through mid-2026. So we really have a comprehensive timeline here.
The value of this specific source stack is that it entirely bypasses the usual shouting match. It gives us the specific claims made by the neighbor, but then it provides this methodological framework to deconstruct exactly how those claims are built.
Right. It's really an exploration of the epistemology of distrust.
Exactly.
And before we get into the weeds, I want to be crystal clear with you about our approach today. We are not here to mock people who hold outside the mainstream beliefs.
No, absolutely not.
We are not taking political sides, whether left-wing or right-wing, nor are we endorsing the viewpoints contained in these sources. We are acting strictly as impartial guides.
Just conveying the ideas exactly as they're presented in this material.
Yes. Our goal is to rigorously steelman these arguments. So, finding the strongest, most charitable version of them, and then apply a credible scientific lens to separate valid institutional critiques from, well, unsupported medical conclusions.
Because simply dismissing someone as irrational, it completely misses the underlying vulnerabilities.
Right, it ignores the context.
Yeah, it ignores the very real, documented historical failures of our institutions that actually gave birth to that widespread skepticism in the first place. If we don't understand the root of the distrust, we can't possibly understand the conclusion.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our source essay begins with a neighbor offering a foundational starting point for their entire worldview. The very first recommendation the neighbor makes is, you need to look up RFK Jr. and his actual credentials.
Which is fascinating because it immediately centers the conversation around a specific figurehead.
Exactly. The essay argues that to understand the modern crisis of institutional trust in America, you literally have to look directly at the current United States Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. really operates as the central axis for this entire cultural movement. And just to place this chronologically based on the dossier, his political ascent was highly unconventional.
Very unconventional.
He suspended his independent presidential campaign and formally endorsed Donald Trump back in August of 2024. And then, following the election, he was nominated and officially confirmed as the 26th HHS Secretary on February 13th, 2025.
Right, in a highly polarized 52-48 Senate vote.
Exactly.
I was looking at the sheer scale of the HHS in these documents, and honestly, the scope of this cabinet position is just staggering.
Oh, it's massive.
The HHS isn't just a regulatory body. It is a massive piece of the American economy and infrastructure. I mean, the secretary oversees the CDC, the FDA, and the NIH.
Right, and they're responsible for Medicare, Medicaid, all public health emergency responses, and all federal medical research.
Right.
It is arguably the most consequential public health position on the globe.
And the source materials highlight the immediate friction of his tenure. They point specifically to a massive proposed restructuring under his leadership designed to reduce the HHS workforce.
Yeah, reducing it from 82,000 down to 62,000 employees, taking 28 distinct operational units and forcefully consolidating them into 15 divisions.
Which is an aggressive, sweeping executive overhaul by any measure. So let's apply our steelman rule right out of the gate here. Why do his supporters, like the neighbor in the essay, see this aggressive overhaul as necessary? What makes him the hero in their narrative?
Well, the charitable case begins by looking really closely at his background, ignoring the modern internet caricatures. He is an attorney with a decades-long, highly decorated background in environmental litigation.
Right, starting way back in the 80s.
Yes, the sources detail his work starting with Riverkeeper in 1985 and his role in co-founding the Waterkeeper Alliance. He basically spent the bulk of his career actively suing massive corporations for polluting waterways.
Fighting on behalf of local ecosystems and human health against heavily funded corporate legal teams. I mean, he has a law degree from the University of Virginia and a master's in environmental law from Pace University.
Exactly. He literally built his name cross-examining corporate polluters who were actively denying that their chemical runoff was harming local populations.
And that history is the crucial key to his appeal, isn't it? To his supporters, he is a battle-tested, adversarial outsider who understands exactly how massive industries operate.
That's precisely it. They look at the very real, undeniable chronic disease crisis in America right now. The skyrocketing rates of obesity, type 2 diabetes, the absolute saturation of ultra-processed foods in our diet.
And the proliferation of environmental toxins.
Right. And when they look at that crisis, they don't see a mysterious biological phenomenon. They see an establishment suffering from deep systemic corporate capture.
They see pharmaceutical companies, massive food conglomerates, and agricultural chemical companies wielding undue influence over the very government agencies that are supposed to regulate them.
Yes, and in that specific framing, if you believe the regulatory bodies are functionally owned by the industries they regulate, you do not want a soft-spoken scientist running the HHS.
You want a fierce, uncompromising litigator who isn't afraid to walk into the captured bureaucracy and just tear it down to the studs.
Exactly. The logic holds together perfectly if you accept the premise of total systemic capture. But the dossier also outlines the fierce critique of his appointment from the broader scientific and public health communities.
And that critique relies heavily on the lens of institutional fitness.
Right. Yes. The argument is that legal advocacy, no matter how successful it is, utilizes an entirely different intellectual mechanism than scientific or epidemiological expertise.
The sources highlight a specific criticism here, that he carries a courtroom litigation style directly into the realm of complex public health. I think we really need to break down the mechanics of what that actually means.
It's a really important distinction.
How does the mindset of a litigator clash with the mindset of a public health steward?
Well, in a courtroom setting, a defense attorney's primary objective is to cast doubt on the opposition's narrative. To win a case, you don't necessarily have to prove an alternate theory. You just have to elevate anomalies.
You highlight highly specific emotional anecdotes.
Right. You find one credentialed dissenting expert witness to counter the opposition's 10 experts, and you use that singular dissenting voice to systematically dismantle the consensus in the eyes of a jury. It is an inherently adversarial, deconstructive process.
But the scientific method is fundamentally cumulative. It relies on the slow, meticulous weighing of the totality of evidence.
Exactly, relying on p-values, peer review, and massive meta-analyses to find biological truths that hold up across millions of people.
The core criticism outlined in the medical journals provided in the sources is that RFK Jr. frequently treats weak, cherry-picked, or highly disputed scientific studies as if they are the ultimate smoking gun that completely overturns massive, replicated scientific consensus.
Right. He approaches public health data like a hostile witness to be broken down, rather than an objective reality to be understood.
I read an interesting counterargument in the neighbor's notes, though. The neighbor essentially asks, if the CDC and the FDA are actually captured by industry funding, which we know happens through mechanisms like the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, where pharma companies pay the FDA to review their drugs, wouldn't bringing in an insider just perpetuate the rot?
It's a fair question to ask.
Right. The neighbor says, don't you actually need an adversarial outsider to break the cycle?
Disruption for the sake of oversight definitely has a valid place in government. But the role of the HHS secretary isn't simply an inspector general or an auditor.
They are an executive steward.
Exactly. They have to manage incredibly delicate, high-stakes scientific operations during public health emergencies, drug safety evaluations, and infectious disease outbreaks.
It makes me think of an analogy. Imagine bringing a highly successful, ruthless defense attorney into a surgical operating room.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Now, that attorney might be an absolute genius at cross-examining the hospital's board of directors about Medicare billing fraud or, uncovering illegal kickbacks from medical device companies.
Right.
But when the patient is on the table, you do not want that attorney scrubbing in and performing the open heart surgery. Their specialized skill set is the adversarial destruction of narratives, not the technical, nuanced execution of medical science.
The public health community's fear is exactly that. You have someone whose primary tool is the weaponization of suspicion, and they are now legally in charge of agencies that require meticulous, objective, scientific stewardship.
And this isn't just an abstract fear. The sources document his long, highly public record of promoting vaccine skepticism through organizations like Children's Health Defense.
Yes, he has spent years questioning the safety of routine immunizations like the MMR vaccine and expressing profound doubts about the global consensus that vaccines do not cause autism.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the neighbor's fascination with RFK Jr. didn't happen in a vacuum. He is the political manifestation of a much broader cultural narrative.
A narrative constructed through highly specific media artifacts that convinced a significant portion of the public that the medical establishment was actively covering up a tragedy.
And that smoothly transitions into the second major piece of the neighbor's worldview. Because the neighbor didn't just suggest researching the HHS secretary. The second explicit demand made during that dinner party was for the author to watch a specific documentary.
Great. Shifting our focus from the political figurehead to the actual persuasive media that builds the architecture of this belief system.
The documentary is called Vaxxed, From Cover-Up to Catastrophe. It was released in 2016. It was directed by a man named Andrew Wakefield and produced by Del Bigtree.
And if you want to understand how a single piece of media can permanently alter a person's entire public health philosophy, we really have to look closely at the narrative engine of this film.
So what is the core premise of Vaxxed?
The film's core premise presents itself as this high-stakes whistleblower story. It alleges that a senior scientist at the CDC, a man named William Thompson, stepped forward to reveal that the agency intentionally destroyed and suppressed data linking the MMR measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine to skyrocketing rates of autism.
And the film gets incredibly specific, claiming that a reanalysis of CDC data performed by a researcher named Brian Hooker proved there was a dramatically increased risk of autism, specifically in African-American boys who received the vaccine on the standard schedule.
The structure of the documentary is, frankly, engineered to be emotionally overwhelming. It utilizes the classic tropes of a thriller.
You have the terrifying, deeply personal tragedy of childhood developmental regression. You have a monolithic, corrupt villain in the form of the CDC.
A silenced insider who can't bear the guilt anymore, and heroic outsider scientists risking their careers to expose the forbidden truth to the public.
Before we look at the science, let's steelman the emotional resonance of the film. Because if you are a parent watching this, the movie taps into a highly valid, universally agreed-upon principle, the absolute necessity of transparency.
Totally.
If a massive government public health agency genuinely possessed internal data showing that a mandated medical intervention was permanently harming a specific demographic of children,
And they actively buried that data to protect their reputation or to safeguard pharmaceutical profits.
that would be a monstrous, civilization-altering scandal. It would validate every single ounce of distrust in the system.
Furthermore, the film weaponizes very real parental grief. There are countless parents who have experienced the profound trauma of watching their child experience developmental regression.
They are desperate for answers, for a cause they can point to.
Exactly. And historically, these parents have often felt patronized, rushed, or dismissed by the clinical medical establishment when they ask complex questions about their child's neurodevelopment.
Vaxxed validates their pain. It looks them in the eye and tells them, you aren't crazy for suspecting the system. The system did this to you.
That level of validation is incredibly potent, but our mission requires us to apply the credible lens to the claims made in the film.
Yes, I want to dig into the foundational methodology behind the people who actually made this movie. Let's start with the director, Andrew Wakefield. Who is he, and what is his actual history with this topic?
The historical context of Andrew Wakefield is perhaps the most critical piece of this entire puzzle. He is the principal author of the infamous 1998 research paper published in The Lancet, which is one of the world's most prestigious medical journals.
Right.
That paper was the original spark that ignited the modern anti-vaccine movement, suggesting a direct link between the MMR vaccine, bowel disease, and autism.
I was reading through the dossier on that 1998 study, and the methodology is genuinely shocking. That entire global panic was initiated by a study involving a sample size of exactly 12 children.
12.
But it wasn't just a flawed, incredibly small study. The investigation into Wakefield's methodology revealed profound ethical and scientific violations.
The investigative work by British journalist Brian Deer exposed the underlying reality of this study. The paper wasn't just poorly designed, it was systematically fraudulent.
Wait, really? Fraudulent how?
Well, Deer's investigation revealed that Wakefield had actually been funded by lawyers who were actively looking for evidence to support a massive lawsuit against vaccine manufacturers. And this was before the study even began.
The conflict of interest is staggering. And it goes further, doesn't it?
Mhm.
The documents show Wakefield had actually filed a patent for his own alternative single-jab measles vaccine.
Yes. So he had a direct, massive financial incentive to discredit the combined MMR vaccine to clear the market for his own product.
And the ethical violations extended to the children themselves. He subjected these children to invasive procedures like colonoscopies and lumbar punctures that were not clinically indicated.
And he even drew blood samples from children at his son's birthday party.
Oh, wow.
Ultimately, following the longest fitness to practice hearing in the history of the UK's General Medical Council, Wakefield was struck off the medical register. He lost his license to practice medicine, and in 2010, The Lancet fully retracted the paper, stating that elements of the manuscript had been falsified.
To put that in perspective for you, the listener, the man directing the movie Vaxxed, framing himself as the brave truth-teller exposing a medical cover-up, is the exact same man who was stripped of his medical career for fabricating the original medical scare for personal financial gain.
That historical reality severely compromises the film's premise. But the movie relies heavily on new evidence, specifically the reanalysis of CDC data by Brian Hooker regarding African-American boys.
Right, the new smoking gun.
However, a review of the academic literature shows that Hooker's 2014 taper, which serves as the linchpin of the film's dramatic climax, was also retracted by the journal Translational Neurodegeneration.
Wait, I want to understand the mechanism of that retraction.
Yeah.
Why was Hooker's paper pulled?
The retraction note specifically cited serious concerns about the validity of its methods and statistical analysis. Hooker applied inappropriate statistical models to a very small subset of data.
Ah, so he sliced it too thin.
Exactly. And he failed to control for crucial confounding variables like birth weight and sibling history. When you slice a data set down into a tiny subgroup and run inappropriate statistical tests, you naturally generate massive false positive anomalies.
That leaves the CDC whistleblower himself, William Thompson. The movie plays audio recordings of him sounding deeply distressed on the phone. What was his actual grievance?
William Thompson did have genuine scientific disagreements with his colleagues about how certain subset analyses were handled in a specific 2004 CDC study.
Specifically regarding whether to use birth certificates or school records to establish the timeline of autism diagnoses, right?
Yes, and internal methodological debates among scientists are a completely normal, healthy part of epidemiology. But the way anti-vaccine activists and the filmmakers framed his tape, often out-of-context statements went light years beyond his actual claims.
The dossier includes a public statement issued by Thompson through his lawyer. In it, he explicitly emphasizes that he strongly supports the use of vaccines, stating that they have saved and continue to save countless lives.
He was not claiming that vaccines broadly cause autism, nor was he advocating for parents to stop vaccinating their children.
His internal dispute over the statistical handling of a subgroup was basically weaponized to imply a malicious, overarching conspiracy of mass harm.
What's fascinating here is the massive gulf between the terrifying narrative constructed by the film and the actual rigorous epidemiology that has been conducted globally to answer this exact question.
I really want to look at that real data. Because the neighbor might say, well, the CDC is corrupt, so I don't trust their data anyway. But the scientific consensus doesn't just rely on one CBC study from 2004.
No, not at all.
I was reading through the 2019 Danish cohort study published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, and the sheer scale of the methodology is just incredible.
The Danish study is a perfect example of the gold standard of epidemiological research. Denmark possesses a unique health infrastructure through their national identification system.
The Dead Central Person Register.
Right. It tracks the medical history, diagnoses, and vaccination records of every citizen from birth. This allowed researchers to track a massive cohort of 657,461 children born between 1999 and 2010.
Compare that methodology to Andrew Wakefield's sample size of 12 children. In the Danish study, they are tracking over 500,000 kids for a decade. How do they account for all the different variables that might affect a child's development in a group that big?
The power of a dataset that large is that it allows statisticians to rigorously control for confounding factors. They adjusted the data for maternal age, paternal age, smoking during pregnancy, preterm birth, and most importantly, sibling history of autism.
Now, what do they find?
After crunching the data on 657,461 children, the conclusion was definitive. The study strongly supports that MMR vaccination does not increase the risk for autism, it does not trigger autism in susceptible children, and it is not associated with clustering of autism cases following vaccination.
But the rabbit hole constantly evolves, doesn't it? When the MMR link was dismantled, the focus just shifted to the ingredients in the vials.
Yes, the target moved.
The neighbor brought up thimerosal, a preservative used in multi-dose vaccine vials that contains mercury. And let's be honest, the word mercury instantly sounds terrifying to any parent.
It sounds terrifying because people naturally conflate two entirely different chemical compounds. Thimerosal contains ethyl mercury, the mercury that causes severe neurological damage. The kind you are warned about in certain types of seafood is methyl mercury.
I actually looked into the biochemistry of this because I wanted to understand why they act differently in the body. And it really comes down to the molecular structure.
It does.
Ethyl mercury has an extra carbon and 2 hydrogen atoms attached to the mercury ion. Because of that, it is processed by the body in a fundamentally different way. It has a half-life in the blood of only a few days, meaning the liver rapidly breaks it down and excretes it through the digestive tract before it can accumulate to toxic levels.
Right. While methyl mercury, on the other hand, has a half-life of over a month and actively crosses the blood-brain barrier, accumulating in tissue.
Conflating the two is like conflating ethyl alcohol, which you drink in a glass of wine, with methyl alcohol or wood alcohol, which will cause permanent blindness and death if you consume even a small amount.
They sound similar, but their biological mechanisms are completely different. Furthermore, purely as a precautionary measure to alleviate public anxiety, thimerosal was actually removed from almost all routine childhood vaccines in the United States over 2 decades ago.
And what happened to the rates of autism diagnoses in the 2 decades after the thimerosal was removed from the schedule?
Diagnosis rates continued their steady climb, driven largely by broadened diagnostic criteria and increased clinical awareness. I mean, if ethyl mercury in vaccines were the biological trigger for autism, removing it from millions of pediatric doses should have caused a massive, immediate drop in new cases.
The epidemiological curve completely refutes the hypothesis.
Completely.
Okay, I have to step in and play the role of the neighbor here. Because if you are a parent listening to this, the scientific data might feel incredibly cold and detached. You might say, I don't care about the molecular structure of ethyl mercury, and I don't care about a Danish registry of 500,000 kids. I care about my son.
Right.
I saw him developing normally, hitting his milestones, and then a week after his 18-month pediatric visit where he received multiple injections, he stopped making eye contact. He stopped speaking. He regressed. How do you possibly discount the physical reality of what I witnessed in my own home?
It's so important to address this. The scientific community does not discount the reality of the parent's experience, nor the profound pain of that regression. The child's loss of skills is an objective, heartbreaking reality.
So what's flawed then?
What is flawed is the human instinct to assign causation based entirely on temporal proximity.
We are hardwired to recognize patterns. If event B happens immediately after event A, our brains automatically assume event A caused event B. In logic, this is identified as the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy.
It is the most natural cognitive error in the world, but we have to look at the developmental timeline of neurodivergence.
Right.
The symptoms of autism spectrum disorder, the loss of speech, the changes in social engagement, the emergence of repetitive behaviors, these naturally begin to become clinically visible to parents and pediatricians around 12 to 24 months of age.
And that biological developmental window aligns exactly with the timeline when children receive a significant cluster of their routine pediatric immunizations.
Exactly. The overlap in timing makes it feel undeniably causal to a parent desperately searching for an explanation.
But the only way to separate a tragic coincidence of timing from actual biological causation is to zoom out and use large-scale epidemiology to determine if the rate of autism is actually higher in vaccinated populations compared to completely unvaccinated populations.
And the global data repeatedly, consistently shows that the rates are the same.
Which brings us to a critical juncture. If the documentaries rely on fraudulent or retracted science and massive global studies consistently refute the core premise, why do intelligent skeptics still feel so fiercely that they possess hard, irrefutable proof of mass harm?
Because they aren't just watching old documentaries anymore. They are going directly to the source. They are downloading data from official government-run reporting systems.
But they are profoundly misinterpreting the specific mechanical design of how those surveillance systems operate. Which leads us to the neighbor's obsession with VA ears.
Yes, V-ears. To understand the modern machinery of medical misinformation, you absolutely have to understand VA ears. It stands for the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, and it was established in 1990, co-managed by the CDC and the FDA.
And it is categorized as a passive surveillance system. Let's define what passive surveillance actually means in this context. I was reading the CDC guidelines, and I was honestly shocked to realize that the database is completely open access.
Oh, totally open.
Anyone with an internet connection, a patient, a worried parent, a lawyer, or a clinician, can log on and submit a report of a health event that occurred after receiving a vaccine.
That open access design is very intentional. VA ears acts as a massive, hypersensitive early warning radar. It is designed to cast the widest possible net to detect unusual patterns or rare safety signals that might emerge when a vaccine is administered to millions of people.
But the CDC explicitly states, in bold print right on the VA Year's website, that a report submitted to the database is not documentation that the vaccine actually caused the event.
Right. And the system is further flooded with noise because healthcare providers are legally mandated to report certain health events that occur after a vaccination, regardless of whether the doctor actually believes the vaccine had anything to do with it.
So if a patient gets a flu shot and 3 days later suffers a heart attack, the hospital is required to log that event into VA ears.
Yes. Which introduces the massive cognitive blind spot that powers the entire rabbit hole. Base rate neglect.
Base rate neglect.
When you administer a medical intervention to hundreds of millions of people, a certain number of completely unrelated medical events, strokes, autoimmune flare-ups, seizures, heart attacks, and deaths, are going to happen in the days following the injection by pure, mathematically guaranteed statistical coincidence.
Let's walk through a literal statistical example to ground this for you. If 10 million adults eat a bowl of oatmeal tomorrow morning, we know, based on national health statistics, that a specific, predictable number of those people will suffer a stroke by tomorrow evening. The oatmeal didn't cause the stroke. The stroke was going to happen anyway due to the baseline rate of vascular disease in the population.
Exactly the same principle applies to vaccines. When skeptics go into the VAR's database, download a raw spreadsheet showing thousands of reported adverse events, and proudly declare, "Look, the government's own hidden data proves the vaccine is killing people," they are completely ignoring the baseline rate of human mortality and illness.
To prove actual biological causation, you cannot just present a list of events. You have to prove mathematically that the rate of an event occurring in the vaccinated group is statistically higher than the expected background rate of that exact same event occurring in a non-vaccinated group of the same demographic.
Precisely.
Okay, I want to pivot and steelman the risk side of this equation now. Our goal is credible nuance, and we are not suggesting that vaccines are magical elixirs with zero physiological consequences.
No, the honest scientific Steelman of vaccine risk acknowledges that vaccines are active medical interventions designed to stimulate the immune system, and no active medical intervention on Earth is perfectly risk-free.
Real, rare, documented side effects absolutely exist, and the public health community monitors them obsessively. The sources detail several of these. We know severe allergic reactions like anaphylaxis occur at a rate of roughly 2 to 5 per million doses.
And with the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines, active surveillance systems, not just VRs, but systems like the Vaccine Safety Data Link that actually review electronic medical records, they identified a real rare safety signal for myocarditis and pericarditis.
Which is inflammation of the heart muscle, predominantly in adolescent and young adult males.
Yes. And we saw the system working in real time with the Johnson & Johnson adenovirus vector COVID shot. The surveillance systems detected an incredibly rare but severe condition called vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia, or VITT.
That's a clotting disorder tied to platelet factor 4 antibodies, right?
Yeah. Correct. And because the system caught that rare signal, the CDC ultimately restricted and then phased out the use of that specific vaccine in the United States.
The neighbor's argument relies heavily on these admissions. They say, if science openly admits there are documented risks, like myocarditis or VITT, doesn't that validate my skepticism? Doesn't that prove I am right to distrust the shot?
It proves that active pharmacovigilance is necessary, and it proves that vaccines have real biological impacts. But the existence of a rare, documented side effect does not mathematically or logically validate the massive, overarching claim that vaccines are intentionally designed to cause chronic illness or that they are part of a global depopulation agenda.
It all comes back to a risk-benefit calculus. We see this biological misunderstanding everywhere. It's like arguing that because seatbelts occasionally cause fractured ribs or a broken collarbone in a high-velocity car crash, which is a factual documented risk of wearing a seatbelt, that seatbelts are therefore a global conspiracy to harm drivers.
Right, and that we should immediately rip them out of all vehicles.
Exactly. The question isn't, is there zero risk of a bruised rib? The question is, how does the risk of the bruised rib compare to the statistical risk of being ejected through the windshield?
The exact same calculus applies to epidemiology. The risk of the diseases these vaccines prevent, the paralysis of polio, the encephalitis from measles, the severe respiratory failure from COVID-19 vastly outweigh the rare, often transient risks associated with the immune response to the vaccines themselves.
Vaccines are inherently emotional because they involve injecting biological material into our bodies, usually the bodies of our children. But to truly understand how this skeptical framework operates and how it scales across different issues, we need to step away from vaccines for a moment.
Let's do that.
I want to look at another topic the neighbor forcefully brought up during that dinner party: community water fluoridation.
Community water fluoridation is the perfect historical microcosm for analyzing how public health operates on a scale of minute trade-offs.
It really is.
And it brilliantly illustrates how the rabbit hole mindset consistently blurs the critical line between high dose risk and optimal dose benefit.
Let's establish the baseline here. I was reviewing the chemistry of how fluoride actually interacts with our bodies.
Yeah.
It works by integrating into the tooth enamel.
Right.
When the enamel loses minerals due to acid from plaque bacteria, fluoride helps remineralize the tooth, essentially replacing hydroxyapatite with fluoroapatite, which is significantly more resistant to decay.
Because of that specific chemical mechanism, adjusting the fluoride levels in community drinking water has been universally championed by the CDC, the American Dental Association, and the World Health Organization for nearly 80 years.
And the heavily regulated target optimal level in the United States is 0.7 milligrams per liter. Decades of data demonstrate that this optimal level reduces cavities by roughly 25% across both children and adults.
From a purely economic standpoint, the CDC estimates this simple intervention saves communities an average of $32 per person per year in preventative dental treatment costs.
That is the consensus. But the neighbor didn't care about the historical consensus. The neighbor was armed with a brand new piece of government data to argue that the establishment is slowly poisoning the population. What is the specific study that sparked this renewed panic?
The renewed anxiety is rooted in a recent monograph published by the National Toxicology Program, or the NTP, which operates under the umbrella of the National Institutes of Health.
And what did it say?
The NTP monograph reviewed available literature and presented an association between higher levels of urinary fluoride in pregnant women and children and a minor decrease, specifically 1.63 points in the IQ of those children.
The government agency publishing a document suggesting that a chemical in our tap water lowers the IQ of children is objectively terrifying. If I am a parent and I read that headline on social media, my immediate reaction is to buy an expensive reverse osmosis water filter and join an anti-fluoride advocacy group.
And that visceral protective reaction is exactly how the information goes viral. But when we apply the credible lens and actually read the methodology of the monograph, we uncover the crucial nuance that the alarmist headlines strip away.
What's the nuance?
The NTP findings specifically and exclusively relate to high fluoride exposure. The monograph analyzed data from regions, often endemic areas in other countries, like specific villages in India or China mentioned in the underlying literature, or areas suffering from heavy industrial pollution, where the natural environmental fluoride levels in the water are routinely at or above 1.5 milligrams per liter.
That is more than double the regulated U.S. target. So how do skeptics take a study explicitly examining the neurodevelopmental effects of high exposure and use it to demonize optimal, heavily regulated exposure?
They erase the fundamental concept of the dose-response curve from the conversation.
Right.
But to maintain our commitment to the steelman, we have to acknowledge that the NTP monograph has sparked a highly legitimate, ongoing scientific debate about total aggregate fluoride exposure.
Because the environment has changed since the 1940s. Today, we receive fluoride not just from the tap, but from daily use of fluoridated toothpaste, mouthwashes, dental varnishes applied by pediatricians.
And processed foods manufactured with fluoridated water.
So asking the scientific question, hey, with all these new sources, is the 0.7 milligram per liter target in our water still the correct baseline, is a perfectly valid inquiry.
The ADA and the CDC are constantly reviewing that total exposure data to ensure the target level remains safe and effective. Validating the need for continuous scientific review is how good public health functions.
But validating the need to adjust a baseline dose does not validate the massive logical leap to the conclusion that fluoride is a deep-state neurotoxin purposefully designed to make the population docile and compliant.
No, not at all.
It all comes back to a basic pharmacological principle. The dose makes the poison. If you have a pounding migraine, taking 2 ibuprofen pills is an optimal, safe dose that solves the problem. If you swallow the entire bottle of ibuprofen, you will suffer massive gastrointestinal bleeding and acute kidney failure. You cannot use the lethal toxicity of an entire bottle to prove that taking 2 pills is a malicious conspiracy against your health.
We see this exact same pattern repeating itself across every topic we've discussed today. Whether it's the interpretation of RFK Jr.'s mission, the reliance on the retracted methodology behind Vaxxed, the mathematical blindness to base rates in VAERS data, or the erasure of the dose-response curve in the fluoride debate.
You take a grain of valid concern. The reality of corporate capture, the necessity of data transparency, the existence of rare biological side effects.
You stretch that concern past its breaking point, strip it of all vital context, and forge it into a massive, unfalsifiable mega conspiracy.
Which means we need to zoom out and look at the blueprints of this belief system. We need to analyze the actual intellectual machinery of the rabbit hole. How do smart, successful, well-meaning people, like the neighbor at the dinner party, build such an impenetrable fortress of misinformation? What are the mechanical, logical fallacies powering this worldview?
The source essay is brilliant at mapping what the author calls an epistemology of distrust. It breaks down the specific logical fallacies that function as the mortar holding the bricks of this worldview together. We should walk through the most prominent ones to understand how they operate in daily conversation.
I found the breakdown of suspicion laundering to be incredibly illuminating. How does this core fallacy work?
Suspicion laundering is a multi-step cognitive process where a valid, broad suspicion is converted into absolute certainty regarding a specific, unsupported claim.
Walk me through the steps.
Step 1. The skeptic establishes that pharmaceutical companies have deep, systemic financial conflicts of interest and have engaged in documented unethical behavior in the past, like Purdue Pharma's role in the opioid crisis. That is an objectively true statement.
True.
Step 2. They established that public health regulators at the FDA or CDC have occasionally made errors or been slow to react to safety signals. That is also true.
Okay, so far so good.
Step 3. They launder that general vibe of institutional distrust to bypass the need for specific, rigorous evidence, concluding that, therefore, the MMR vaccine causes autism and millions of doctors are complicit in covering it up.
It's a sleight of hand. It's like saying, we know major banks have been caught laundering money for cartels, and the security guard at my local branch looked at me suspiciously yesterday. Therefore, the tellers at my local branch are actively draining my personal checking account to fund illicit activities.
Exactly.
You cannot connect those dots without actual documented proof of the specific theft. The general existence of corruption does not prove your specific hypothesis.
That naturally flows into the motive fallacy. This is the pervasive assumption that because a pharmaceutical company profits financially from manufacturing and distributing a vaccine, the massive body of independent global science proving the vaccine's efficacy and safety must be inherently fabricated.
It assumes that a financial incentive automatically negates biological reality.
But the sources point out the flaw in that logic. Surgeons profit immensely from performing complex surgeries. Plumbers profit from fixing your pipes. Just because the plumber gets paid doesn't mean the leak in your kitchen isn't real. The financial transaction doesn't alter the physics of the water.
And when you confront a skeptic with the physics of the water, when you present them with the massive 650,000-person Danish cohort study that definitively proves MMR does not cause autism, they deploy the next defense mechanism, moving the goalposts.
The narrative never concedes defeat. When the MMR link was dismantled by global consensus, the claim didn't die. It just shifted focus to the thimerosal in the vials.
When thimerosal was removed and autism rates continued to climb, the goalpost moved again. Well, it must be the aluminum adjuvants.
Then it morphed into, it's not one specific ingredient, it's just too many vaccines given too soon, overwhelming the immune system.
Eventually, the claim broadened out so far that it simply blamed the entire pediatric schedule for all modern chronic illnesses. The hypothesis is structurally designed to be unfalsifiable. It just continually relocates to evade the evidence.
This brings us to how they handle the data they do accept, which relies heavily on the Texas sharpshooter fallacy.
Let's define this because it explains exactly what Brian Hooker did in the Vaxxed documentary. Imagine a guy walks up to the side of a barn, blindfolds himself, and fires 50 random shots from a shotgun into the wood.
Okay.
Then he takes off the blindfold, finds the tightest cluster of 3 bullet holes, paints a bullseye directly around them, and declares himself an expert marksman.
In the realm of data analysis and epidemiology, the equivalent of that shotgun blast is called p-hacking. If you take a massive, complex data set and slice it into dozens of tiny, hyper-specific subgroups by age, by race, by gender, by the exact week of vaccination, by maternal age, pure mathematical probability guarantees that eventually one of those tiny subgroups will throw off a statistical anomaly.
And a researcher engaging in p-hacking will ignore the dozens of analyses that show zero correlation. They paint a narrative bullseye around that one random anomaly and publish it as causal proof of a crisis.
And finally, we arrive at the most overwhelming defense mechanism of all, category collapse. This is what happens at the very end of the dinner party.
Right.
You start out talking about a specific subset of data regarding the MMR vaccine, and within an hour, the conversation has collapsed into a massive, tangled web where vaccines, water fluoridation, the tragedy of 9/11, the World Economic Forum, big pharma, the deep state, and global communism are all blended into one heavy, emotionally suffocating mega-narrative.
It becomes impossible to untangle because every single global event is perceived as a manifestation of the exact same hidden cabal.
This raises a critical, somewhat haunting question. How does a skeptic's belief system become so completely hermetically sealed that no amount of contradictory evidence can penetrate it?
I mean, if the architecture of the belief dictates that any mainstream expert who agrees with the scientific consensus is inherently corrupt, bought off, or blinded by the establishment,
And any credentialed expert who dissents is a brave, persecuted truth-teller.
then the system is entirely closed. Any lack of evidence for the conspiracy is simply held up as proof of just how brilliant and deep the cover-up actually is.
Exactly.
But I want to push back on this framework for a moment because it paints the skeptic as entirely illogical. But if I'm sitting at that dinner table and my neighbor, who is a successful engineer or lawyer, presents me with a flash drive containing 3 feature-length documentaries, hundreds of screenshots of whistleblower quotes, a spreadsheet of VA years data, and 50 hours of podcast audio dissecting government patents.
That's a lot of material.
Right. Isn't that massive volume of information proof of something? How can someone do thousands of hours of research and be completely wrong about the fundamental reality of the science?
That is the illusion of the rabbit hole method of research. The rabbit hole method is entirely focused on measuring the volume of data. It asks, look at how many links, articles, and videos I have gathered that suggest the system is lying to us.
While the credible lens method is different.
Yes, the credible lens method, which scientists use, is entirely focused on measuring the quality of the data. It asks, are these studies peer-reviewed? Were the findings successfully replicated by independent labs? Are we looking at large, controlled cohort studies, or just a collection of isolated anecdotes? Do these claims establish a plausible biological mechanism?
1,000 angry blog posts, a dozen podcast interviews, and 10 retracted studies do not equal the weight of one rigorous 650,000-person epidemiological review. Volume does not equal validity.
That perfectly transitions us into the practical application of everything we've covered today, because now we have mapped the terrain.
We understand the appeal of RFK Jr.'s adversarial stance against corporate capture. We have dismantled the fraudulent foundations of the Vaxxed documentary.
We understand the biological and chemical nuances of ethyl mercury and fluoride. We comprehend how base rate neglect makes passive surveillance systems look terrifying, and we've categorized the logical fallacies that hold the worldview together.
But practically speaking, how do you actually have a conversation with someone who is deeply entrenched in this ecosystem? How do you engage with a neighbor, a beloved family member, or a close friend who holds these intensely guarded beliefs?
The very first thing you must internalize is that throwing a barrage of clinical facts at them will almost always fail. And it fails because these beliefs are no longer just academic hypotheses about epidemiology. They have evolved into load-bearing pillars of the person's identity.
The sources cite research on identity-protective cognition, which is a concept explored by researchers studying how cultural values shape our perception of risk. When a belief becomes tied to your identity, challenging the belief feels like a physical threat to your sense of self.
To the person sitting across the table from you, their belief in the conspiracy means something profound about who they are. It means, I am a fierce protector of my children. I am awake and observant while the rest of society is sleepwalking. I am brave enough to stand up to a terrifying, monolithic deep state.
If you aggressively attack their claim that the MMR vaccine causes autism, they don't hear a debate about the methodology of the Danish cohort study. They hear you saying, you don't care about the safety of kids. You are gullible and you are foolish.
It triggers an immediate defensive psychological shutdown.
Changing their mind publicly feels like humiliation. It feels like surrendering their identity as a protector. So the source essay provides a brilliant conversational strategy called the charitable ending.
The goal of the conversation is not to force a dramatic, tearful surrender where they admit they were wrong. The goal is to build a bridge by validating the underlying emotional wound or the core ethical concern without ever endorsing the false scientific conclusion.
You have to find the patch of common ground before you introduce the nuance. In practice, this means actively deploying the steelmans we've discussed.
Yes, you might say. I completely respect your protective instinct towards your kids. And I agree that pharmaceutical companies have a history of prioritizing profits over people. I also believe we need absolute, unvarnished transparency from agencies like the CDC and the FDA.
But based on the rigorous quality of the independent global evidence I've reviewed, I just don't think the data supports the conclusion of a coordinated global medical cover-up or the idea that routine childhood vaccines broadly cause autism.
By phrasing it that way, you are actively refusing the false binary that the rabbit hole demands. The rabbit hole says you must either trust the experts blindly or question everything and believe the conspiracy. You are demonstrating a third path.
That third path is the mature intellectual position of proportional distrust. It is entirely healthy to distrust power, but the evidence required to validate that distrust must scale with the magnitude of the claim.
Exactly. If someone makes a small, localized claim, like a specific drug company hiding a minor side effect in a clinical trial, you require a moderate amount of evidence.
But if someone claims there is a civilization scale, multi-generational medical cover-up involving millions of pediatricians, virologists, epidemiologists, and regulators all across the globe lying in unison,
that requires an absolutely staggering, airtight mountain of irrefutable proof. You do not lower your standard of evidence simply because the person making the claim is styling themselves as an anti-establishment outsider.
So what does this all mean for us as we navigate this deeply polarized landscape? Basically, we have to stop treating the visceral feeling of distrust as if it is empirical evidence. I love analogies, and I want to close our analysis with this one from the sources. Distrust is exactly like a smoke detector installed in your house.
It is a vital, life-saving tool.
It is designed to wake you up, make you hyper-alert, and prompt you to get out of bed and actively look for a fire. But the rabbit hole mindset hears the smoke alarm go off in the middle of the night, and because they already distrust the electricians who wired the house, they immediately assume the entire house is already burned to the foundation.
Without ever bothering to walk down the hall to see if there are actual flames in the kitchen.
Distrust is the alarm. It is not the fire.
That framing is essential. You want the smoke detector to function perfectly, but you still possess the responsibility to verify the physical reality of the threat before you panic.
What an incredible journey we've been on today. Let's briefly summarize the massive, expansive terrain we've covered. We started by exploring the complex political rise of RFK Jr. and the inherent tension between disruptive, adversarial environmental litigation and meticulous public health stewardship.
We thoroughly debunked the narrative mechanics of the Vaxxed documentary, contrasting the tragic fraud of Andrew Wakefield's 12-person study with the gold standard methodology of the 650,000-person Danish cohort.
We unpacked the biochemical differences between ethylmercury and methylmercury. We learned how the mathematics of base rate neglect weaponizes passive surveillance data in VAERs, and we weighed the actual dose-response chemistry of optimal versus high-dose fluoride exposure.
Finally, we mapped the logical fallacies, from suspicion laundering to packing, that lock these belief systems into place, and we discussed how to engage with empathy through the charitable ending.
And as we wrap up, we want to remind you, the listener, that your goal in absorbing all this detailed methodology isn't to go out and aggressively win arguments at dinner parties or dominate comment sections on social media.
No, your goal is to remain internally calibrated. You want to match your level of confidence to the actual rigorous quality of the evidence, ensuring you don't get swept away by the sheer emotional volume of the noise.
Before we sign off, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. We have spent this entire deep dive analyzing how individuals misinterpret complex scientific data because they have fundamentally lost trust in our medical and governmental institutions. But let's flip the lens and look forward at the institutions themselves.
Okay, let's hear it.
If our public health agencies, the CDC, the FDA, the NIH, know that every single minor communication error they make, every internal methodological debate their scientists have, and every single rare, documented biological side effect that occurs will be instantly weaponized by a massive media ecosystem into proof of a grand, malicious conspiracy.
Does that immense suffocating pressure actually force those agencies to be more transparent?
Or does it terrify them into becoming even more secretive, defensive, and heavily sanitized, thereby accidentally fueling the exact massive conspiracies they are so desperately trying to extinguish?
It is the ultimate tragic paradox of modern public health communication. The demand for absolute purity creates the very opacity that breeds the distrust.
Think back to that murky diagnostic landscape we talked about at the very beginning of the show. The desire for a clean binary answer is deeply human, but the reality of biology and institutional science is incredibly complex. The X-ray machine might feel broken, but we still have to figure out how to navigate the muddy waters and heal. Thank you so much for joining us on this extensive deep dive. Keep reading the primary sources, keep rigorously applying that credible lens, and most importantly, keep asking the hard, nuanced questions. We will catch you next time.